On this video, we interview Dr. Mike Brass. Lee Scory and myself, Gary Hibbard, are interested in governance, risk and compliance. That's why we run these stress-free GRCs. And Mike Brass is an expert in this particular area, many years experience in a variety of different security type related roles. And we wanted to spend 30 minutes with him just asking lots of questions. Some of the participants in our stress-free GRC asked questions too. You get access to the first 30 minutes. Unfortunately, unless you're there, you don't get access to the whole hour. So we hope this interview is insightful. I certainly learned a lot. I know Lee did. The participants did as well. We got lots of key takeaways. So enjoy this. And again, thanks to Dr. Mike Brass for taking his time to be on the stress-free GRC. Enjoy.
Awesome. Right. Okay. So welcome, Mike, to the stress-free GRC event. Thank you ever so much for agreeing to participate. So first of all, Mike, tell us a little bit about you and about what you do, and in particular, your experience around GRC.
So as quite a few people here would know, I'm obviously South African. I've been here in the UK for a large number of years. My background was the traditional, going from IT technical background through into GRC, which currently is accounting for probably about 80% of my time at a company called UBSense, which does real-time location tracking systems with the likes of BMW, Daimler, Lockheed Martin, various transit authorities, and various companies out in the aerospace industry. And some other people would know my doctorate is actually in archaeology, so I'm affiliated staff member at University College London at the Institute of Archaeology. And my view is there's a lot of cross-pollination between academia and in particular the social sciences and what is actually required by GRC practitioners. And that is something that I bring out, I think, quite strongly in the course that I had put together that's released on Udemy at the moment. It's been live for the last 6 weeks. In terms of trajectories of where I'm actually seeing the GRC to go, and I am fully aware that other people have different views on this, is I'm not seeing a move so much between CISO to CIO. I see a movement there for people who's wanting less stress. What I'm seeing for the CISO role is a much closer gathering between the traditional information security practices and data privacy. And I think that alignment is only going to become a lot closer as the EU regulations develop, as the USA eventually plays catch up to the entire world. And of course, the consultations that are underway here in the UK.
Okay, brilliant. That's fantastic. Thanks for that introduction. So, just for the avoidance of doubt, so let's start with the basics. This is stuff that you know inside and out, Mike, but others may not be fully aware of what GRC actually is. So just in a few words, can you explain exactly that? What is GRC and why do you think it's important?
I'll start from the easiest one, compliance, that is auditing. So if people think of ISO 27001, and there's others than this standards, there's PCI DSS for credit card industries. This is just making sure that a company isn't compliant with any standards that are out there that have been imposed or voluntarily agreed by the industry in which that company operates, or laws and regulations. So you can also think of GDPR in terms of just making sure that you are not breaking any GDPR regulations. Moving on for governance. So from that perspective, you are sitting at a much higher level within the organization. This can either be the level right below your executive, so your chief marketing officer, your chief sales officer, CFO or CEO, or you can be sitting at that particular level. And in my company, I'm quite happy to say it. I report into the CFO. I've got a dotted line to the CEO because we've got a particular security arrangement in which it's the three of us. And those two, they are board members. So we're owned by an investor company. So I'm also reporting into the board in that regard. And it's much more of a strategic mindset in just making sure that you are aligned with the various objectives, both of the business and of the different departments which you have to cover and interact with. Risk, that's, to me, this is one of the most interesting pieces, because information security by its nature is risk management based, but it's also resiliency based. More importantly, in my opinion, and it's not emphasized quite enough, it's also a quality management function. And I don't see too much of a distinction between it being a risk management function and a quality management function. In my view, there are two sides of the exact same coin. Yes, you can put sticking plasters and everything else on whatever it happens to be, fix the root cause, get those processes, and you're performing quality management. And Greg van der Gast, for example, keeps mentioning it out on LinkedIn about this. And in his books, he uses Boeing, which isn't quite the good example it once was of this. But the premise remains exactly the same. If you get those processes right, if you get the data flows right, if you get the business systems right, then a lot of the problems can actually go away. Fine, you've got all the technological solutions, you can harden your laptop, fine, that cuts out a whole lot of other crap, but you've got to have the business processes. You've got to know what risks you're actually attempting to prevent. Another way of wording it is effectively you're attempting to reduce the adverse effect of threat actors or malicious behavior on the business processes, on the value creation processes of a business. So if you start to reformulate it that way and you start to think of it as a quality management function, then you're going quite a long way towards also bringing the executives on board.
Brilliant. So just on that then, Mike, as a business leader, once I've identified that actually, yeah, I need to deal with GRC, where would I even start? Where do I go looking to get me on the right path to implementing this correctly? Aside from obviously buying your Udemy course.
That's not actually a question I've thought of too much, mainly because I think what we'll increasingly see is that type of view being taken out of the CEO's hands by the nature of the regulations that are appearing. If you're touching, for example, whether aerospace or you're touching the automobile industry, there are various things that you need to have in place in order to be part of their supply chain. So in some ways, it's actually been forced upon you. And I think that will increasingly be the case coming out of the insurance industry. So the question to my mind in that isn't so much, we're probably thinking of the same thing, but I would rephrase it a bit differently. The CEO is fully aware in order to either continue sell into a particular industry vertical or to have the ability to increase the amount of sales compared to competitors, what does he or she need to do to have an additional business differential? And in order to be able to demonstrate that their product can not only do this magnificent thing out there, but it can stop his or her company getting that 200 questionnaire and annoying the hell out of the staff and reducing the focus on the actual productivity of the business. And again, like it or not, I think the bedrock of all of that to compel that sort of view and that sort of change, unfortunately, is regulation. And that's really what it does come down to. So if the CEO is wanting, let's say, I'm going to pick on this at random. Let's just say they're doing a document management system. They believe they can produce a secure document management system. The choice that they are facing, they are going to have some form of internal enterprise risk management function, for want of another better term, in all of that. It's going to be, how do we make sure that we've got all of our fundamentals in place, because we are increasingly getting these questionnaires, we're increasingly getting asked. Our competitors are saying they're following the NIST standards. What are those standards? What does all of this actually mean? And why should I be putting money into all of this?
Okay.
There isn't too much of a compelling answer to it, to be frank. It's you've got to. This is much more of a sales pitch in it, in being able to turn this around and saying, well, one, obviously you're going to stop people asking certain a number of questions. That's going to be okay. But in two, in what sense can the company actually create effectively a sales playbook that the company is able to tell a story, and what person is best suited? You can put in these things behind the scenes, and therefore, okay, we need a security person in place. What type of security person? And it comes back to the whole debate at the senior level. Should there be somebody at the board level who actually knows what information security is and who can take that responsibility at that level?
Mike, so that's a brilliant answer, very comprehensive. So we've had a couple of questions that have been raised, and I'm going to actually couple one of them with a question that I had for you. And that is, the question I had was, what do you think is the most challenging part of GRC for people to grasp? And that's kind of coupled with the next question. So it's a double question. How do we avoid regulations then being forced upon organizations, and that results in a checkbox approach? So is the biggest challenge to prevent it becoming a tick box exercise, do you think? So yeah, so two questions. What's the biggest challenge, and how do we stop it from just becoming a tick box exercise?
I don't think we're going to stop regulations from being forced upon, just because human nature, the risky behavior of human nature in general is, if we can avoid something to make a profit, we are going to do so. I'm not singling out anyone in particular, but I think by and large, when you look at a number of industries which are less well regulated than certain national strategic industries, this is the kind of behavior. So the moment you are adopting a laissez-faire attitude in terms of regulations or the market, people are going to take advantage. I don't think there's any way of getting away from the fact that there needs to be better regulation, there needs to be better standards on this. And by extension, therefore, I think we're always going to be sitting with a large measure of checkbox exercises. Where we can get away from that, it depends entirely upon what the customer organizations are looking for. So to some extent, that does depend upon the industry verticals that any organization is operating in. And mine is operating across multiples. We're in transit, we're in aerospace, we're in the German automobile industry, we're in the health industry. And the very nature of going across vertical means we have to be secure in terms of doing the best that we can. In terms of more challenges, that always comes back down to making sure that this isn't a baseline in any shape or form. So it's coming also back to, how can we, excuse me, how can we make sure that, let's say we're introducing a new arm into the business, that arm is being set up correctly from the start, that we have got quality processes that are in place at the start. If that arm is incorporating some previous activities that the organization had done, to what extent does this need to be revamped and redeveloped? And how can we sell that story to our customers in the way we're going about it? How are we approaching our customers as to what they're expecting, and that feedback, how has it been then incorporated into the processes that are currently in place in the organization? And if we need to change those particular processes, and yes, I've got some internal examples in mind, because that's what we've actually been grappling with for the last couple of weeks. How can we achieve a suitable outcome both for the customer and for ourselves?
So,
And
Mike,
this also
just
does really, sorry, yeah,
sorry,
sorry, I was
no,
babbling on.
no, I didn't mean to stop you in full flow, but you actually just spared a thought, and again, it links to one of the questions that's been raised here. I think, by the sounds of things, this is one of those areas where an organisation needs to understand its context. So its internal and external issues, if we put that into context of ISO 27001, for example. But Ben's asked a great question, and it occurred to me as I was listening to you talking, which is, how important do you think that it is for GRC to have a well-defined and agreed at board level, at top level, risk appetite? Do you think that's important? I mean, you said earlier that risk is, risk is almost now resilience, but how important to GRC is it having that well-defined parameters, risk appetite at the board level?
I think extremely important. I also think that relates a lot into the question that Mike was asking immediately beforehand about the trend of CFOs into CEOs. Personally, I am not a fan of CFOs becoming CEOs. I don't, I mean, this can vary. A person can have a skill set, so I'm not discounting that there are exceptions. But when you're going from when you're looking at it from a CFO's perspective, it's financial risk management, it's finance in a lot of ways. It's a different skill set to be a CEO. And I'm not in, from one particular example where it actually turned out to be absolutely disastrous, I am not convinced that CFOs traditionally will make good CEOs. What I am convinced is a good CFO will have a good grasp of certain fundamentals of the risk management. And I think a good CEO will be able to look at risk management from some other perspectives as well. And when you get into the totality of what that actually means for an enterprise risk management function in terms of the risk appetite and how that's been set at the very top, I think that is absolutely fundamental. That does guide the decisions that will then be taken at the lower levels in the discussions that the CISO will subsequently have with the chief sales officer, with the revenue officer, with the CTO, etc. And also to understand their level of risk appetite and ensuring that everything is actually aligned throughout.
Okay, actually, you had a question about mistakes that.
Yeah. What's the biggest mistake people make when implementing a GRC framework?
Oh, Lord.
Sorry.
That's such a loaded question.
Yeah.
The Chatham House rules apply. You're in a safe place. What's the biggest mistake that you see people make in general? You don't have to name anyone,
or even what is the most challenging?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit on it, and I think this is the reason why, again, it occurred to me that Lee and I were having this conversation earlier, that you said putting a CFO into the position of a CEO is actually not the best thing. So is that the biggest mistake that you see people make when they implement framework, or is it not understanding the fundamental aspects of GRC?
I believe that it's because they regard it as too technically focused. So you're getting back into the old idea that this is an IT operational security matter. I'm coming at this from the perspective where I believe cyber security is IT security done correctly, and information security is the layer above it, encompassing a lot more. So that's entirely my perspective on it. And with regards to Mark's question there, yes, I regard GRC as an integral part of that information security. I think it's the bedrock of information security, and obviously it goes beyond the cyber security. And in fact, there's certain fundamentals that can be in place. I'm thinking of cyber essentials. It's a bugbear of mine. I think if done correctly, it's a good enough starting point. But ultimately, what is it actually achieving, and what is it achieving as a stepping stone to actually get your company in a good state? One, the baseline of it is effectively a self-assessment form where it's relying on you to actually be moral and honest and to have implemented what it does. And as for the cyber essentials plus, again, it's perfectly adequate if it's actually implemented correctly. But for Christ's sake, given that I have done this now for some 4 years, if I wanted to be an immoral person at an immoral company and to proudly display that, there are 1,001 ways around the actual auditing and to be able to get that done. I'm not going to mention those ways in case I give anybody some ideas.
I think most of
Um,
us know.
yeah, but effectively, if I see a company that has got this and proudly proclaiming it, I actually don't pay attention to it, quite frankly, unless I am able to delve down and that company is able to demonstrate to me that they have actually got those fundamentals in place. I'm much more inclined in that case to take it that step further and look at, well, from a NIST perspective, from a 27001 PCI DSS perspective, or any of the others, how are you actually operating in all of this?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And Mike's just made the point there. Information security risk is too focused on attributable cost. How do we communicate risk impact in a way that doesn't rely on the pounds, shillings, and pence, I guess, but remains meaningful to the C-suite? How do we convey that message? I think that's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, and in some ways, it's well, how are you defining those dollars and cents, or dollars and pennies, pounds and pennies, whatever it happens to be? Where are those particular figures coming from in order to plug it into your Monte Carlo simulations, into your fair analysis, to whatever it is? And to some extent, for better or for worse, sometimes I pare it back from that into sort of a hybrid type of model, where the businesses agreed these are their top 10 strategic priorities, for example. Okay, so what are the actual risks against that? What are the business risks against that? How does the information security relate to that? And if you're coming up with a couple of scenarios, to what extent is that actually going to impact the company in a financial way? So unfortunately, you are deriving at a particular range at that, and then you can run some simulation analysis, some Monte Carlo analysis on it, and you can come up with some statistical probabilities and that, which it doesn't really address what Mike is saying, but it gives a degree of comfort to the executive on there. But more importantly, in my opinion, when, let's say, I'm talking to my CEO, it's okay. He goes, okay, if something happens, we're going to get hit on that, some sort of probability. But how do we stop that from actually happening? What are the conditions within the business itself that might end up in this happening? And therefore, can we actually fix it? Can we have the discussion? Who are you talking to about that? What is being done at that root cause level? So I don't view it any of those risk management formulations, I don't view that as an end result when I'm talking to the executive. I'm viewing it entirely as an actual starting point to be able to have some further discussions with the relevant stakeholders within an organization. And that's why it goes back to what I said at the start. Risk management and quality function management are actually two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, I would completely agree. We got a couple of really interesting questions, which we're actually going to, in a moment or two, we'll cover those questions when we stop the recording. So anyone who's watching the recording, sorry, you're going to miss out. But I'm going to, just for the benefit of people who are watching this on YouTube or, who are catching up later, I'd be really interested if you can summarize just what you think the skills are or the knowledge or experience that's needed for a career in GRC.
Business management.
Okay.
Ultimately, it depends on also what level within GRC. Are you coming in as a GRC analyst, in which case it is useful to have some level of mathematical knowledge. It's useful to have some level of compliance knowledge. And the governance side can quite frankly be taught through experience. If you're coming in it from perhaps another department within your company, perhaps there's another business function elsewhere, maybe you've even been a small business owner and you wanted to come in on this, well, then you're going to start coming at it perhaps from having much more of a governance perspective on it. You're going to have some idea of risk, but not entirely certain what it is. Compliance, well, you've been you've had to do compliance training and this, that, but what does it actually mean? So again, it depends exactly where the person happens to be coming from.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's a nice way just to finish this part, that's on video, because I asked the question because someone asked me or leveled not a complaint, but a comment about GRC. And they said that in the cybersecurity industry, in their opinion, GRC is seen as, and I'm going to put this in air quotes, entry level to the industry. And I said, I think it's absolutely the reverse, that a GRC is ultimately where you end up, because for all the reasons that you mentioned, you've got to have good understanding of business management, you've got to have experience, you've got to have a good understanding of various different networks, whatever those are, good grasp of risk management. You mentioned Monte Carlo for one example of risk management or risk calculation and analysis. I think GRC is up here, whereas they were making the claim that actually it's seen as almost an entry level topic. So with that, I'm not going to dwell into that because we've got some really interesting questions and we've got some more questions. But we're going to stop the recording there so that everyone who's here can get themselves off mute if they wish, and they can ask questions straight to you rather than just being my voice and Lee's. So I'm going to stop the recording now. So thanks to everyone who's watching, and catches up next time. We'll do all of that. But